Welcome, everyone, to the JCPA webinar on anti-Semitism and hate on the internet during a pandemic. This is part of our JCPA Values webinar series we've been running to provide education and action ideas to everyone during this challenging time of social isolation. JCPA is the national network hub of 125 Jewish community relation councils around the country and 17 national Jewish agencies. We come together to tackle today's pressing issues. As the coronavirus continues to surge globally, anti-Semitic, xenophobic, and hateful messages and conspiracy theories are proliferating rapidly online. These messages spread hate and misinformation, making it more difficult to access accurate information while elevating fear and anxiety. While some of these messages are new, many are simply old tropes repackaged. To discuss these issues, we have two representatives from ADL Center on Extremism. The ADL is the world's leading anti-hate organization, of course a member agency of JCPA, and its Center on Extremism is on the front lines of the effort monitoring and fighting extremism, terrorism, and hate, both foreign and domestic. The center provides resources, expertise, and trainings that enable law enforcement officers, public officials, and community leaders, as well as internet and technology companies, to identify and counter emerging threats. I am delighted to have with us today two speakers from ADL, Oren Segal and Rabbi Aryeh Tuchman. Oren Segal is the Vice President of the Center of Extremism. For over 20 years, Oren has been devoted to evaluating the activity and tactics of extremist groups and movements from across the ideological spectrum, training law enforcement officers and publishing reports and articles on a wide range of extremist topics. In 2006, Oren was recognized by the FBI for his exceptional service in the public interest. He was named to the Forbes list of 50 influential, intriguing, and aspiring American Jews in 2019. Rabbi Aryeh Tuchman, the Associate Director of the Center on Extremism, where he monitors and responds to anti-Semitism and extremism across the country. He is a specialist on Holocaust denial, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and attacks on Jewish history and theology. After their presentation, we will take questions. You can write your questions in the chat box. Over to you, Oren.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today and to be here with Aryeh. Before we jump into our presentation, in particular for Aryeh to really show people what we're seeing, I wanted to just share a few thoughts. What remains very much top of mind for me and all my colleagues at ADL is, of course, how the coronavirus has disrupted all of our daily lives. We hope that everybody who has made time to join this call is settling into this new normal as best as possible. Many of us at ADL are working and even schooling from home for the first time, as we also practice social distancing. I hope that you and your families continue to stay safe and healthy through this time. Well, I'm particularly grateful to JCPA for hosting us today to provide a snapshot on this very important topic of hate and extremism in the time of this pandemic. To be honest, my colleagues and I are able to distract ourselves from the impacts of this global pandemic and what it has done to our day-to-day lives by refocusing on what we do best, which is combating hate and extremism. Indeed, the coronavirus continues to surge globally. ADL continues to fulfill its mission. One of the ways that we do that is by tracking and exposing anti-Semitic and xenophobic messages and conspiracy theories. By maintaining this steadfast focus on combating anti-Semitism and bigotry and extremism, we're able to serve and meet the moment as it comes. During these times of uncertainty and anxiety in particular, it's important to track and expose such hatred, especially as so many Americans and people around the world are spending more time online, in part because they are forced to. It may be more likely that individuals will come across more hate. So extremists never miss an opportunity to exploit a crisis and to further their hateful agenda. And we too at ADL don't miss an opportunity to step up and respond. And this blame game that we see from the extremists has already started. We've seen politicians seeking to politicize this virus, calling it a Wuhan or Chinese virus, for example, or suggesting in some way that foreigners are solely responsible for spreading it. We've seen Asian Americans and Jewish Americans and other minorities being blamed for spreading this virus. We've seen internet chatter and an online culture in which white supremacists and other extremists are suggesting that the way this disease is spreading is because of an influx of foreigners. So there is always a risk that this kind of hateful rhetoric and outright scapegoating of minorities will find a life of its own. We know from history that at times of crisis, the voices of reason sometimes can be ignored and replaced with those who want to spread discord and sow hatred. That is why it's so important for us to understand what we're seeing. The more that you know, the better prepared we can be to educate and respond. We need to be united as we work together to resolve this public health crisis and also the virus of hate that is coming in its wake. So as Melanie said, ADL Center on Extremism is on the front lines of this effort. We have published a resource, which my colleague Aryeh will go through some of the findings through his PowerPoint on the hatred and extremism that is circling online. We will make that resource, as well as our guidebook to anti-Semitic tropes, available in the chat throughout this conversation. You know, ADL's mission has always been to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice for all. And what strikes me is that during this time, that dual mission of fighting anti-Semitism and also fighting other forms of hatred has never been more important. So after Aryeh speaks, we'll be happy to take questions about what you've heard, what we can do, and our way forward. So it's my pleasure to now turn it over to Aryeh, a longtime colleague of mine. I'm so happy you're here, Aryeh.
Thanks. Great to be here. All right, you can see my screen? Great. So thank you all for having me today to share with you some thoughts and some findings. You know, during this very scary and unpredictable time, one of the things that has given me comfort is seeing how our friends and neighbors have pulled together to support one another. In some ways, crises like these bring out the best in people, but unfortunately, they also bring out the worst in people. And the ADL Center on Extremism has documented an outpouring of hateful rhetoric and real-world actions in connection with the virus. And as we're going to see in this presentation, sometimes that hatred is expressed knowingly by true believers and people who are ideologically committed to attacking minorities. And sometimes that hatred and fear is expressed by otherwise well-meaning people who are simply scared. And unfortunately, today, we also have to deal with other issues, including the politicization of the virus and the work of people who think it's funny to spread hateful messages and memes, which, as we'll see, can have a real impact in the world and reinforce bigoted attitudes among readers and viewers. So let's walk through some of the outbreaks of anti-Asian prejudice, which is called Sinophobia, fear of foreigners generally, and of course, anti-Semitism. Before we start, many of the images that you're going to see in this presentation will express their anti-Semitism through the incorporation of what we call the happy merchant image, which you see on the screen right now. This image was created in the 1990s by an anti-Semitic artist as a visceral depiction of Jewish malevolence. In this one image, we see physical repulsiveness, intimations of scheming, intimations of greed, and this image is now ubiquitous among people who want to express anti-Semitism in a visual form. And before you now is, to me, one of the most striking visual expressions of anti-Semitism pertaining to the coronavirus. This image implies that Jews are spreading the virus which to historians among us will not be unfamiliar, as it evokes the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory dating back at least as early as the 14th century. The Jews were responsible for poisoning the water of wells throughout Europe in places that were being ravaged by plague in order to actually spread the disease. And in response, thousands of Jews were burnt at the stake, and others were rounded up into their homes or their synagogues, which were then set on fire. And I think that this image is even more sinister because in a way it suggests that Jews are themselves a virus that afflict all of humanity. One of the anti-Semitic tropes which we see expressed today is the idea that Jews are using the coronavirus to infiltrate non-Jewish society and implement a globalist agenda. You can see that in the slide right in front of you, where there's the Trojan horse with the virus as its head, the happy merchant meme inside, and the globe indicating the globalist agenda, which is being pulled into the society. And this theory harkens back to theories of a global Jewish cabal to undermine nations, which was expressed most famously in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in the early 20th century. Sometimes anti-Semites claim that Jews actually created the virus. And again, they invoke this well poisoning theory. And they posit that Jews are trying to get rich by selling vaccines to gullible non-Jews. On the image on the left, you see, again, the happy merchant dressed in a hazmat suit, and the caption says that Jews are behind numerous diseases that have afflicted the world in the past number of years, and that they have patented a vaccine for the coronavirus before this all started in the first place. On the right, you have the idea that in the midst of the financial crisis as a result of, on the right you have a theory which implicates the well-known Jewish financier George Soros, and states that the locus of the attempt to disseminate the virus is in Israel, which was already working on the vaccine. And you'll note at the bottom of that image the term coincidences, which is a code word that hardcore anti-Semites use when they want to express in a shorthand way that they think that there is a Jewish conspiracy afoot. And of course, anti-Semitism is often linked to allegations of Jewish greed and Jewish control of finance. And in this image that you can see, the theme of Jewish manipulation of finance amidst the virus is expressed by this image of Uncle Sam, who's writing a check for $1.5 trillion made out to Jewish finance, which is being held again by the happy merchant after a stereotypically drawn Asian person begins coughing. Now, whenever theories of a global Jewish conspiracy are invoked in the modern world, references to the Rothschild banking family and to George Soros frequently follow. On the left, you see a tweet from former Sheriff David Clark, in which he says without evidence that George Soros is somehow involved in the spread of the virus. And on the right, you see a cartoon where a member of the Rothschild family is being weighed against ordinary people in the context of the coronavirus. And the Rothschild banker is larger and heavier than the regular people that he is weighed against, which signifies the power that he has. And the smoke which is coming out of his cigar is in the shape of dollars and euros, which again indicates his focus on money at the expense of the people, which is another common anti-Semitic trope. Others use the coronavirus crisis as an opportunity to attract attention to their own agenda, including anti-Zionism, which in these examples we see infused with anti-Semitism. This image that we have on the screen right now appeared on an anti-Zionist Facebook group that ADL monitors. And this one draws on the fact that there were cases of the coronavirus at the APAC conference a few weeks ago, as a way of suggesting this similar message, that God is using the spread of the coronavirus from AIPAC as a way of sending a message that Zionism itself is the deadly virus. Many anti-Semites on some platforms, such as 4chan and Telegram, are cheering the news that the coronavirus reached Israel and are cheering the fact that Jews are being affected by the virus. The caption on the image to the left in relation to the news that the virus has afflicted 3 Israelis, if you can see it, says 3 down, 5,999,997 to go. Of course, that is a reference to the Holocaust, which they hope would happen again. And on the right, we have people suggesting that they should weaponize the virus, describing how they want to go to a synagogue to spread it among Jewish people. Some anti-Semites, again, are encouraging a more active spread to Israel, to Jewish communities of the virus. On the left, this person published a list that says that if you have certain symptoms, you should do certain things. And it mentions a bunch of different places, but it targets Jews twice. And most notably at the end, when it says that if you have a combination of these symptoms, you should go to Jerusalem or other Jew places. And on the right, you see, this is actually a still from a clip of a moving image where the figure is dancing. And when you combine that dancing figure with the message above it, it's clear that the person who made this meme has ill will towards Jewish people, wants to harm them by spreading the coronavirus in a Jewish supermarket. Now, to be clear, there is no indication that any of these things have actually happened anywhere. We have no indication that an anti-Semite who has coronavirus has gone into a Jewish supermarket and has purposely spread it. And I think that in the context of everything else that's happening, this should be very, very low on the list of things to be concerned about. But it is indicative of where some anti-Semites are thinking. Another thing I want to raise is Holocaust denial. Holocaust deniers often try to infuse their theories about their theory that the Holocaust never happened into discussions about current events. And so here they capitalize on confusion about modern methods of disposing of bodies in order to cast doubt on the number of Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. Moving on to Sinophobia, there are people who have used terms like Kung Flu, Winnie the Flu, the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, and these nicknames serve to link the virus with China and its people, including Chinese Americans for some people, which scapegoats and stigmatizes them. Now, I am glad that President Trump issued his tweet today calling for people to not target Asian Americans for the virus, but I wish that we would all be more careful about using language that can serve to stigmatize others, whether we intended to do that or not. There have been memes all over social media which mock Chinese people and exaggerate their habits in a way that also blames them for the outbreak. So here you see a couple of memes that tie the virus to foods that Chinese people eat. The image on the right is particularly designed to provoke disgust on the part of the reader. And I'll just say that although it's true that the virus appears to have originated in a marketplace in China, that's no reason to demean Chinese culture. And when you think about it, we in the US also have some practices that can transmit disease. People keep turtles and lizards as pets, which can spread disease, and cats can spread toxoplasmosis. And perhaps most relevantly, how often do we hear of food recalls because our industrial farming practices lead to E. coli outbreaks? Another trope is to claim that Asian people will travel when they are sick, even though and disregarding the danger of disseminating the sickness further, and therefore they're laying the blame for the spread of the virus at the feet of Asian people. The image that you can see on the screen even contrasts quote unquote regular people with Asians, which also serves to other the Asians and dehumanize them. And if you believe that Chinese people caused the virus and are responsible for spreading it, then it's unfortunately not a great leap to start calling for Chinese people to be actively avoided, even if they are healthy. And so here you see some memes from that on Instagram and Reddit, which are mainstream platforms. They suggest that Chinese people should be feared because of their ethnicity, so don't touch them, don't eat at their restaurants, don't share a drink with them, and if an Asian person coughs near you, then you have to fear for your life. Some have gone even further than avoidance and are encouraging more direct action. On the left, you have a meme referencing a movie, and on the right is a message from Telegram where the user encourages everyone to treat a Chinese person who is coughing as if they have a deadly disease and to try actively to make them feel as uncomfortable as possible. And they say that if the person confronts you about that, you should act as if you're scared, and you should consider shooting them because the courts will likely acquit you out of self-defense. And notice the last line all the way at the bottom of the image on the right. It says, escalation is acceleration. This is actually a white supremacist code word. It speaks to the desire of white supremacists to exploit and exacerbate tensions between various minorities and accelerate open conflict between ethnic groups. So we see this further weaponization of the coronavirus. On the left, you have a post from a Telegram user. That's a platform which is frequented by extremists, among others, but often many extremists, where a Telegram user gives a few goals for people during this crisis, including stigmatizing Asian people, to exacerbate racial tensions, and to spread panic. And on the right, we see a post which calls on people, if you look all the way at the bottom of the posts, to cough on Black kids and start a race war now. This image captures the concept of accelerationism even further. These guys are stocked up and armed and ready to fight to advance their agenda. Here you have a few more posts from extremist sources that talk about weaponizing the coronavirus. In the upper left, they suggest spending time at FBI field offices to spread the virus to law enforcement. On the bottom left, you have the idea of spreading the virus to the transit system. And really, it's all summarized on the right, where a white supremacist group is calling on people to cough on local minorities. Another form of these hate messages is anti-immigration. On the left, you see a tweet that links a few major illnesses that occurred in the past with foreign countries and implies that diseases are actually foreign in nature, and therefore the US should screen everyone who gets to enter our country. And on the right, this is a post from Telegram, which faults the diversity and multiculturalism of the United States, says that those things are the cause of the spread of the virus, and says that allowing people into the country will cause the diseases to spread further. And such things are anti-white, and the post, in an ominous way, says at the bottom that we need to remember who is responsible. I raise these points not in order to enter debates, policy debates or political debates about how to prevent disease or maintain the health in our country. The point is to show that fear of the virus, it stokes xenophobic sentiments, and in some cases it can be politicized. But this xenophobia is particularly attractive to white supremacists who can use an image, for example, here of their racist mascot, Pepe the Frog, who is dressed in a hazmat suit and is calling for a travel ban. Now, these expressions of bigotry that we have reviewed so far exist within the context of non-racist, but still conspiratorial thinking generally. At the core of many of these conspiracy theories is the idea that the virus was actually manufactured and in fact may have been patented earlier. Some say that it was patented in the 80s, some say that it was patented in 2015 or 2018. And perhaps the virus was created as a bioweapon or for some other reason. And the truth is that while there is a patent for a version of the coronavirus, it's a different version than the one which we are dealing with right now. There is no patent on this particular strain of the virus. I'm raising this because I think it's important, specifically in the context of the racist and anti-Semitic expressions that I talked about earlier, because conspiratorial thinking generally lays fertile ground in which anti-minority theories, anti-Semitism, and other hateful ideas can spread. Because of course, not everyone who believes that the virus was cooked up in a lab will move beyond that. But if you believe that the virus was manufactured in a lab, you're one step closer to looking for a scapegoat or a culprit. And that culprit may be the US military-industrial complex, but it could also turn out to be George Soros or the Mossad or another aspect of the global Jewish conspiracy. And there are some real-world impacts to the anti-Semitic theories and racist ideas that have been circulating in recent weeks. Following the APAC conference, where again we saw that there were several people who ended up becoming clear that they had the coronavirus. There were reports that GW University was quarantining people who had gone to APAC simply because we have on the bottom a report that that there were flight attendants from JetBlue who made harassing comments. One flight attendant from JetBlue who made a harassing comment about dirty Jews spreading the virus. Some people have seen a recent video that showed up. I saw it on Yeshiva World News that depicted a Hasidic man who was refused service at a tune-up shop in New York. And although others were being serviced, this Hasidic man was refused, and the worker said that this man was spreading the virus. Now, the dealership has their own side of the story, but the video certainly looks like there may have been some anti-Semitic animus going on here. There is also a real-world impact on Asians. On the left-hand photo is a graffiti that was painted on an Asian American-owned business in New Mexico. The message there says "Truca with the coronavirus," which the word truca is apparently Spanish slang for beware or watch out. And it was put, excuse me, on the on the Asian American restaurant. And on the right, we see just a couple of examples of cases where Asian Americans were attacked or harassed because of the association that some people have made between Asians and the virus. And in fact, we in the Center on Extremism at ADL have identified over 40 incidents of anti-Asian attacks and harassment in the past 2 months in connection with the pandemic. One final example here, you have white supremacists who are taking advantage of the virus to promote their hatred in the real world, not just online. We had between March 20th and 22nd, the white supremacist group New Jersey European Heritage Association showed that they had posted coronavirus-related propaganda on street signs and utility poles in New York and central New Jersey. And I'll call your attention particularly to the 3 parentheses that are around the word media on the right-hand image. Some people may know that the presence of 3 parentheses around a word is indicative in anti-Semitic circles of an allegation that Jewish people are responsible for what is being described. So just to close, as I said in the beginning, this is a moment that brings out the best in people, and unfortunately it brings out the worst in people. Thank you so much for exploring with us and with me some of the expressions of hatred and bigotry in connection with the coronavirus. I hope that all of us can remain positive for ourselves, and I hope that we can all come together with the best parts of ourselves to defend those who may be targeted by bigotry and hatred as this issue continues. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Aryeh, for that really detailed and very important presentation. We are going to be taking questions from the chat box. The chat box should be on the upper right side of your screen, so please put some questions in there. While we're waiting for questions, I have a question for you and Aryeh, for you and Oren. ADL has produced an amazing guide called Antisemitism Uncovered, and it has a lot of what you were talking about, and I want us to be able to share it with all our readers. But what I would like to know from you is, how should people use the information that you just provided them? People are feeling afraid, they're feeling angry when they hear about this and they see this, but they want some action. They want to know what they can do, especially while they're home. We know from the JCPA perspective that we always promote being involved civically, being involved with people in other communities, join forces on common cause issues. We know that it's important to know the facts and be able to have the resources and ability to both report issues, but also to educate others. So how can we use these materials? What should we do with our anger? What should we do with our fear? And what can we do while we're home?
So I can just jump in to start, and then Oren, if you want to add anything. I would just say one of the things that I observe frequently, especially when we think about the politicization of anti-Semitism, and I think it's relevant here as well, is that in order to really fight against anti-Semitism and racism, we need to be able to call out anti-Semitism and racism wherever they occur, and that includes in our own camp. And so I think it's important for all of us, when we become aware of both the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories as well as the hateful rhetoric towards others as well, for all of us to be able to speak up and fight against those expressions, whether it occurs elsewhere or whether it occurs in our own mishpacha as well. I know that ADL has some other resources to help people at this time. Oren, do you have any information about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the important questions is, what can we do now? And what is the reality? Many of us are home now. Many of us have more time than perhaps we thought we would normally have. And it's not just a matter of trying to fill the day with something to do, but I think it's trying to fill the day with purpose. And I think there are many different innovations that I've seen, whether it's neighborhood innovations on how to make sure that local stores are, continuing to run. But I think that fighting hate and bigotry, there are options for that as well. And the first one is true no matter whether there's a pandemic or not, which is if you see something on these social media platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, or if your grandkids are on Steam and some other platform that you've probably never heard of, it's important to flag those to those platforms so that they are aware, so that they know that the community of users is saying that this is unacceptable or that they need to take a look in order to keep users safe. But I would also say that you can flag these items to ADL as well, right? If you are not getting a response that you think that you need to get, or you feel like there is some sort of hatred, anti-Semitism or otherwise, that you think we need to know about that, we have 25 regional offices, and you should know that we are open for business to handle that incoming. And then thirdly, I would say this: reach out to your local ADL if you find yourself wanting to contribute in even deeper ways, right? We have programs that enable people to essentially, be our eyes and ears, to help us collect the data. Data is important because data enables us to resource to the threat. It enables us to be more loud in our advocacy. And so we have a fact finder program. If there's other programs that you're interested in, reach out to your local ADL regional office, and we will provide you with a menu, whether it's addressing the hate that you see online, whether it's creating a conversation in your community, whether it's providing educational resources. We have a lot of tools that are really ready-made for a moment like this.
Someone asked a question about what is the relationship with state and federal officials, and what are they doing in the fight against anti-Semitism and hate?
Well, I mean, I know that they're, you know, I'm on. That state and federal officials are obviously dealing with the same level of crises that we're all dealing with. I mean, I could tell you that in New York, the Attorney General in New York State is launching a hotline in which people can report hate incidents related to the coronavirus. That could be anti-Asian incidents, anti-Semitic incidents, incidents of all kinds. I think that actually is really important and speaks to the seriousness in which, you know, at least the New York Attorney General's office is taking this threat. And so, you know, beyond that, you know, I will tell you that the Center on Extremism continues to work with law enforcement on a federal, state, and local level, right? When we see extremist threats, et cetera, we continue to provide them with information, and we are available for them as well. And so, you know, to the degree that, you know, many of the perhaps in-person meetings and some of the committee meetings, you know, hate crime task forces, you know, may be refocused at the moment, my sense is that the need to combat hate and bigotry is not off of the agenda for state officials, and ADL will make sure that that continues to be true.
Great. I wanted to chime in here that in areas where there isn't an ADL official, JCPA and the Jewish Community Relation Councils around the country work hand in hand with ADL. And so you can always, if you see something, you can always report it or share your concerns with the JCRC director as well. Another question here is social media. How do we as Jews respond on social media, both if somebody posts something on our website, posts something on our webpage or Facebook page, if somebody posts something on their own Facebook page, or if we see something of concern? How can we respond if we want to respond without just sounding angry or pointing fingers? What works and what doesn't work?
Aryeh, I'm happy to start, and then please add anything that you think I may have missed. You know, when it comes to your public page, whether it's a Facebook page, a website, some other social media, you know, obviously monitoring the comments that are left is really important. And I would say if you're finding that people are leaving threatening language directed at your institution, your community, you need to reach out to law enforcement. You know, to the degree that people are leaving commentary that may not rise to the level of a threat, you're not concerned necessarily for the safety, but you think it's problematic, you know, I think that's where you can report it to ADL too, as we collect anti-Semitic incidents around the country every single day. And sometimes something may be an incident that includes anti-Semitism, but doesn't necessarily rise to the level of criminal activity or the safety and security of your community. And we would be able to provide, you know, a response in terms of whether we think it needs to be elevated or not. You know, JCPAs are there, SCAN is there as well. But, you know, I think when it comes to your public community pages, you have a whole set of resources that are available. Private, I think, raises a different issue. And to me, this is the issue of the Thanksgiving table, where, you know, you're not always going to get along with people who are your friends on social media, and sometimes comments will be made. But this is where I want to underscore what Aryeh said. We have an ability to take a high road and also make sure that our narratives and our discussions are done with the utmost respect and civility. So you need to use your voice and call somebody out when they are engaging in hateful rhetoric. You need to be able to rely on other organizations in order to support you if you don't know how. And this is where our guide comes in. You know, Melanie asked, what do you do with this anti-Semitic guide that you guys just produced? Well, sometimes people don't even recognize anti-Semitism at all. They don't understand where it comes from. This guide is intended to provide information to help educate people to recognize anti-Semitism. Because once you recognize it, then you can take the necessary steps to respond as a friend, as a colleague, or to take it to the next level if it's somebody who's outside of your community. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Aryeh.
Yeah, just very briefly, I would say, going back to the idea of reporting things to ADL, sometimes we see situations where people think, oh, this is not, such an important, comment, or it doesn't rise to the level of being worth reporting. But I can say from experience that there are times where, as a result of numerous reports of similar incidents that have come in, we have been able to sort of put pieces together in a way that sheds more light on the activity of one or more actors that on any individual level may not seem to be that important, but they could indicate the presence of a larger campaign. And so I think that that's also something to consider. We may not be able to do anything about any individual comment. We can walk you through how to report a comment to the social media provider, but the information for us is equally important because it allows us to sort of put the pieces together of the puzzle of what is the state of anti-Semitism in the country.
Thank you. So we have a few questions here about the First Amendment. When is something not, push the barrier of the First Amendment? When is something go too far? How are you able to discern that? I'm going to give another question at the same time, which is, what other groups in the non-Jewish community are you working with to fight hate and extremism?
Yeah, so on the first question, I think it's an important one in the sense that much of the hatred that was outlined in Aryeh's presentation, that makes up some of the resources that were shared on the chat, some of the issues that we're seeing are completely protected speech. It's not a question of the speech being illegal. In this country, you can kind of be as hateful as you want sometimes. But it's our free speech to call out speech that we believe is hatred, right? It's our responsibility to respond. And so it's not a question of whether this is allowed or not. And, especially since we're talking about online platforms, where this is not the sort of classic public square, they can actually make a decision about what they will and will not allow on their platforms. So a tweet blaming Jews for spreading the coronavirus, or a Facebook post basically saying that Asians should not be allowed into this country, or a Telegram post saying go sneeze on a Jewish person by a white supremacist. Like, it's not a question of whether that is allowed legally to say. It's a question of what are the values of these platforms that will allow that to be spread in their community. They have a role to play. This is why ADL works so closely with the tech industry, sometimes in a good way, and sometimes, because we have to encourage them to be and to show more corporate responsibility. So again, I don't think this is a question of whether the speech should be allowed or not. It's a question about us asking people to take a stand against bad speech and to ask the companies to do more, because that's the way information is spread. And when we know that hatred exists on the same space as legitimate news, we need to be extra careful about that freedom of speech. And then the second question, I believe was, I don't remember. What was the second part of that question?
What other groups do you work with in the non-Jewish community that are also working to fight hate and extremism? And what are you doing together, such as the Southern Poverty Network, other groups?
Yeah, I mean, there are other groups in the space. I think one of the things that we've done with the Hispanic community is provide training about how they can do some of the reporting in terms of the anti-Latinx community hate crimes. So we've literally delivered not only a presentation that demonstrates the level of anti-immigrant and anti-Hispanic rhetoric, but arm them to be able to report it and collect that, because again, data really speaks. And so, the effort to collect data and make it available is part of anti-hate work. It's that collection process. Again, for us, we have partners within a range of communities. It's about being allies, right? So whether it's African-American community, Muslim community, various different parts of the Jewish community, we find when unfortunately, there's an incident, a hate crime, or even worse, demonstrating allyship and standing up. But there are other groups that are also government, groups that are making efforts to combat hate. So we will work with anybody who's dedicated to our mission of combating any form of hatred and extremism.
Great. This will be the last question. So we talk about reporting hate, but not all states have hate crime legislation. Is that correct? And is there an effort by ADL and other Jewish groups, including JCPA, to try to create federal hate crime law, and also working with government and state government, local government to collect hate crimes and work with people to report hate crimes? And what are the barriers to making that happen?
So listen, ADL has essentially for 30 years been working on the issue of hate crime. ADL actually wrote the sort of model statutes in which the hate crime, federal hate crime bill was passed. And we continue to advocate not only for the, I think, 5 states that remain that don't have federal hate crime laws, but for those states that don't have complete hate crime laws, to make sure that they are covering all aspects of the hate crime laws. So that's part of our fundamental advocacy. I also think one of the things that we have focused on is every year when the FBI puts out its hate crime statistics, nearly 90 cities of 100,000 people or more don't report any hate crimes at all. And so part of our advocacy is to ensure that law enforcement is resourced and also taking that seriously. Again, the more data we have, the more we can act. So hate crimes, not only as the organization that helped write those laws, but to make sure that those laws are leading to action continues to be a primary part of our work.
Okay, I am going to ask one more question. Is there a particular age demographic that ADL can associate with those who post these images and messages? And now that many or most of our schools are using virtual classes, are there materials that can be suggested to teachers looking for resources?
Yeah, I will say that, anybody, the age range is quite varied. I think it changes depending on the platform. There are certain platforms that we're on that clearly the demographic is younger. And part of that is not only based on the speech that we're seeing, the techniques that they're using, but in our investigations, sometimes we are able to uncover the actual person. And unfortunately, the 13, 14, and 15-year-olds are sometimes engaging in this. So, but I would say overall, it's a very broad range. In terms of educational resources, I encourage people to visit the ADL website and our educational resources and curriculum that is created by our education department on how to deal with issues of xenophobia and anti-Semitism. And recently, we just launched a piece about how to deal and talk to your kids about being in the midst of a pandemic, right? These are all resources that I think will help people have conversations with their kids, et cetera. So the educational resources are very fecund as well on our website.
Great. Oren, Aryeh, thank you so much. This was a really important webinar. It was wonderful working with you, and we're so glad that you were able to share this with the wider community. We hope to be working closely with you, and maybe we'll bring you back for another webinar as these issues continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For everyone, JCPA has another webinar this Friday on the 27th. With Yossi Klein Halevi, and we'll be looking at what's happening in Israel. We hope you'll tune in. Thank you again.